I guess we can start. Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this important webinar on countering disinformation in relation to COVID-19. My name is Desna Chukumba, and I am a PhD candidate in chemical biology and the president of African Graduate Student Association. And I also host a podcast called Taking Into Account.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adeze Emeli. I am also a PhD student here in the Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences. And I'm also on the e-board for the African Graduate Student Association. I am the social chair. So next, we're going to go in order and have the panelists introduce themselves. We will start with Sam. So Sam, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Sam Afriya here. I am a first-year master's student at the University of Michigan School of Information. My research is focused on user experience and artificial intelligence, and also bringing technology funding to emerging markets. I work part-time right now at NVIDIA on the AI Nations team.
Thank you. Kwaku, if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kwaku Krobe Asante. I am a communications and media practitioner based in Ghana, but I work with the Media Foundation for West Africa as the foremost freedom of expression and media and good governance organization working in the West Africa region. And particularly for this discussion, I am the team lead for Fact Check Ghana. It is the foremost fact check organization in Ghana. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Rutendo, if you can go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rutendo Chabikwa. I'm from Zimbabwe. I am currently a PhD DPhil student at the University of Oxford, where I study digital media and political participation and also misinformation and disinformation. I am also the co-host of Taking Into Account.
Thank you. Fortunate.
Hi, everyone. My name is Fortunate Chifamba. I'm also from Zimbabwe. I'm a recent MPH graduate from the Harvard School of Public Health, and I'm currently one of the administrators of a COVID-19 information platform, which we're running on WhatsApp.
Gabriel.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Gabriel Del Sol. I'm from the United States, and I'm a research analyst and associate with the firm Park Advisors, which hosts the platform Disinfo Cloud, which connects technologists countering disinformation to stakeholders from civil society, academia, and government. Thanks.
Miriam.
Hi, my name is Miriam Daibe. I'm a third-year PhD candidate in the Biomedical Sciences graduate program at The Ohio State University. I'm also on a state-appointed commission here in Ohio for the new African immigrants. And I'm also a health chair over there as well.
John.
Yeah, I'm John Elvis Higgin. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Bielefeld University, Germany, and a senior researcher at the University of Cape Coast, Ghana. My research background is into public health with specific reference to health promotion and education, and also into psychology and sports sciences.
And Martin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Martin Wafula. I'm a DPhil, that is PhD student at University of Oxford. I'm reading DPhil in engineering science, specifically in communication theory. And right now I'm working on compression of graphs. It's very great to join all of you in this session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves. I will make a note to the audience. If you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A box below, and I'll be monitoring it as well. And now Desna will kick off our discussion with an opening question.
Yeah, so I think what's really exciting or important about this conversation is, the dissemination of information about COVID has been really important in how we manage the pandemic outside of just the scientific developments. And it seems that, both mis and disinformation have become a pandemic on their own. And it's not only pertinent in the African communities, but also across the world, even in the United States. So I think to really get the discussion started, maybe we have to define what mis and disinformation actually are. So I'll defer this question to Rutendo.
Thank you. And so basically in the industry, misinformation is any information that is not true, that is passed on, regardless of intent to misinform, or whether or not there is intent is really not the question. Disinformation is when it is politicized and taken over mostly by states as computational propaganda, with the actual intention to disinform, create and something that is not real and that is not true. And so misinformation is not as political, might have political effects, but really has no intent to be that political, whereas disinformation is more state-centered and more created by states in general.
So maybe we can go into, because what's interesting about misinformation and disinformation, I think a lot of people probably even logged into this panel wanting to discuss, particularly certain communities that are affected by misinformation and disinformation campaigns. And what's been really interesting has been to see just how much all of us are pretty much affected by some of these misinformation campaigns, especially because with COVID-19, not a lot has been known about the virus. And then all the information about how to actually tackle the pandemic, the information has kept on changing. And a lot of people are now really confused because they don't understand the science behind it or some of the public health effects. So I guess my next question would be really like, how have we seen these misinformation campaigns really affect communities? And I think I'm going to ask John as a public health expert on this.
First of all, I want to start from this angle that looking at the existing socioeconomic and structural inequalities or disparities in Africa, misinformation and or disinformation could be very, very impactful in the lives of, let me put it, vulnerable groups, especially the poor, the needy, children and women of low socioeconomic background. And most of the things that I have come to realize is that it is maxing or this information or distorting opinions or narrations that are currently going on around COVID-19 is maxing the official public health information in terms of health promoting behaviors that we could use to manage the pandemic. Because of these maxing of these health promoting behaviors, most of the vulnerable groups are tempted to feed on information that are not healthy and that are not helping in managing the spread of the virus. Apart from that, you'd agree with me that it has also caused a bit of anxiety, a bit of panic. So if you look at anxiety from psychological perspective, what normally happens is that there are two forms. So you look at the cognitive aspect and you look at the physiological aspect, or what I call the somatic aspect. Now, for every human being, your body thrives on two systems, like the goal-driven system and the stimulus-driven system. Now, once the body's reaction is superimposed by the stimulus-driven, which is the disinformation or the misinformation that is coming from the public, from diverse sources. Now, what we tend to do is that our action tendencies are skewed towards health compromising behaviors. So people forget even simple hand washing. People nose masking. Instead of wearing the masks, they put rather the mask under the chin. People don't even wear at all when it comes to social distancing. People are overcrowded and not resorting to these standard protocols that would help manage the spread of the virus. Additionally, you could also realize that disinformation, because of the panic and the anxiety within the general populace, I mean, it led to interruptions in the food supply chain in general markets, and prices of goods got hiked up. And for people with low socioeconomic status, people are tempted to queue for basic necessities that haven't helped with managing COVID-19. So I would also say that people are also using the opportunity, leveraging on the opportunity to more or less make monetary gains out of just the vulnerable group. The very little that we have that would want to manage disinformation and misinformation is making people lose money, not for the right purposes, but rather lose money on buying things that may not help in managing the virus within our geopolitical life in Africa. So basically, I think that what is not helping matters is that most of these are being churned by, high-profile people, social commentators, and that people are even losing public trust in basic public health information. Because if you see political actors, if you see high-profile social commentators, if you see journalists, if you see I call influencers within the society doing this, then for me as the ordinary African in any community on the continent, how do I trust that the very things that they are championing in managing the disease is actually the truth? So it's been here and there, and that I think that for other panelists who may be talking about what steps that we need to do to help manage this spread of the virus using fact-checking machines or fact-checking techniques or things that would help we giving more scientific narratives about the disease or the virus, so that the general public, the ordinary person in any village, any town, anywhere in the African continent knows that indeed, if I'm getting this is exactly what I need in helping manage local transmission within our setup.
Thank you, John. So to give other people some time to speak, I also wanted to go into another question that was related to what you were talking about, actually, about the various avenues for misinformation. And maybe Kwaku, you could start us off with a discussion on that.
All right, thank you. So the various avenues for misinformation, as we have realized in Ghana, it tends to use the already available channels for information. So in Ghana, for instance, now a lot of the pieces of information travels through social media platforms. So you have WhatsApp, you have Facebook, you have Twitter, you have Instagram being at one end. And then sometimes even the mainstream media that is supposed to have a certain higher form of verification tends to also become for prey to being channels of misinformation. But largely it tends to show its face on social media platforms. This one sees it and forwards it to another person, the other person forwards it to the other person, and it travels wide and wide and wide, and before you realize it is all around, and it is extremely therefore difficult to track them and combat them.
Something that's really interesting is how the piece about social media, right? I think a lot of people tend to assume that misinformation will affect communities that don't have access to social media. or people who are more vulnerable. But when in the case of the social media age, now it seems that all of us are susceptible to this disinformation campaigns, especially if the culture of fact checking doesn't really exist. So one of the interesting bits about how this misinformation has been spreading has been, I guess, due to the lack of some of these terms in indigenous languages. And this is not only true for African communities, this is true even in Asian communities and in South American communities. So I'm interested to hear from Abdul and Fortunate about some of your campaigns that you've started in order to translate some of this information about COVID into indigenous languages so that it's easier to spread information about COVID.
I can start. So at the beginning of the pandemic, around March, I would say, or April last year, a group of high school students and I started a WhatsApp platform to counter COVID-19 disinformation and to just provide COVID-19 information to Zimbabweans using WhatsApp groups. We realized that most of our families were getting all of their information from WhatsApp, and it was unverified information. Somebody would just get a passage that comes from a pastor who has written something for his church, and then it would just be forwarded so many times. And people needed somebody to sort of fact check all of this information. So we started this group. We started with a very small target. It was just to target our parents and to have a centralized place where if people had questions, they could ask. And because I have access to internet 24/7, which is not the same with many people living in Zimbabwe, I could quickly go on the WHO website or the CDC website to get information in real time to send it to people at home. So right now we have an audience of about maybe 1,200 people in 5 WhatsApp groups, and the groups have been running since last year. The type of audience that we have is pretty much mixed. We have people from different ages. We have people working in the public health field in Zimbabwe as well, who are also part of this group. But most of our participants are parents, regular folk from the community. They are school children who have not been going to school as just as everybody else in the world. And one thing that we did to sort of counter misinformation was that we closed the groups to audiences putting in comments and being able to text, but we only open the groups at certain points where we hold Q&As, and that has quite helped to keep some of the misinformation out of the groups, because we wanted all the information that goes through our channels to be verified by public health professionals, by medical doctors. So that is the campaign that we've been running so far.
Oh, sorry, Abdul, you're on mute.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Abdullahi Zani, and I am a freelance science journalist based here in Abuja, Nigeria. And I actually work for the African Science Literacy Network and Science Communication Hub, Nigeria. Yeah, so thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this conference. And I would like to apologize for joining a bit late to the meeting. Yeah, so like in Nigeria, I think that conspiracy theories and misinformation about vaccines and diseases are not new. You know, we like, for example, we know that in 2004, there was widespread rejection of polio vaccination in northern part of Nigeria. And so, you know, with that, when COVID came in, misinformation quickly spread, and it was fueled by the internet and social media, because there was actually huge gap in communication. And I think one of the causes of that is the fact that like in northern Nigeria, you know, a lot of people many people don't have access to, many people don't, most of the information that is being communicated about the virus is not in local languages that the people understand. So this information is communicated in English, and like in northern Nigeria, it's predominantly Hausa language that the people speak. So what we started doing as a network, that is the African Science Literacy Network, in partnership with the Science Communication Hub Nigeria, what we started doing then was to work with scientists who are based in universities like the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, which is in Kaduna State, northern part of Nigeria. So we collaborated because the African Science Literacy Network is actually a collaboration between scientists and journalists in order to promote public understanding of science and also to dispel misconceptions about scientific issues. So we paired together scientists and journalists. What we do is we just go online, go on the internet, go on social media platforms, especially Facebook. And when we see these viral informations, what we do is we now try to kind of debunk, fact check and debunk that misinformation. Then we now translate it into Hausa language and we now published the story. So personally, I worked with a scientist at Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, and there was we went on Instagram and we saw there was a very popular social media influencer in northern Nigeria, and he made a video and he was touting, he was saying that the shea butter can actually cure the coronavirus disease. So he did that video and he posted on Instagram, and because he was based in Germany and he was speaking Hausa, a lot of people, believed him and they liked the video and it was spreading. So what we did was we fact checked all that, and wrote a piece about it, and then we now translate it into Hausa language and we published. So we usually publish our stories on the website. We have a website and then we share on our social media platforms. So what I think the limitations and the caveat is that, these people, not everyone has access to the internet, and because we have like the African Science Literacy Network, most of our followers are on Twitter and also on Facebook. Yes, so we share our stories on Twitter and on Facebook. So I think the caveat there is that a lot of some people, many people, don't go on Twitter. A lot of, when you look at the audience where this misinformation circulates a lot, they are more on Facebook compared to Twitter. Yes. Thank you.
So you brought up a good point about how disinformation was spread because of charismatic characters who are spreading, some of these messages. So I wanted to ask, I'm going to direct this question to Martin. So what are some of the reasons why, misinformation is so easily accepted? What is it that the people who start, these misinformation and disinformation campaigns, what are some of the techniques that they use to be able to develop an effective message?
Thank you very much for that question. One of the things that we first look at and has been talked about in this session before is the way information spreads today, and we are seeing that the access to this information is very quick and very fast. Within 1 minute, a piece of information has just spread all over the world, and everybody's looking at it. Now, there are specific or some few things that people who spread this wrong information, especially intentional one, exploit. And we can start with the cultural beliefs with the people of people. So when we go back and we know that there are already communities that do not believe in modern medicine, for example, or we know that there are communities that really do not even believe in taking things such as vaccines and so on. So when such communities, when such cultural beliefs are understood by the people who are spreading this information, it's exploited and it makes it even better. So they find a way to justify this false information. Let's take an example of a community, for example, in my country, Kenya, a certain community that does not believe in vaccination, and there's been a lot of effort by the government to have this group even have their children get vaccinated on for infections such as polio, tuberculosis, and so on. So when such information spreads, it resonates with them because they already have this cultural belief. Some of them are religious, and one of the biggest influencers in this world, especially in our African communities, are the leaders, church leaders, and mosque leaders, and those religious leaders or traditional village elders. These are people who are very influential. Some of them, even those without an education or even those without expertise in a certain area, would have a lot of influence in that area compared to the experts. So we have a pastor today who goes to a church and tells the congregants that this is going, the COVID-19 vaccine or the COVID-19 has been manufactured so that you are all given the mark of the beast. And when Christians who have read about Revelation hear about mark of the beast, they we do not want mark of the beast. And now you're told here there's COVID-19 vaccine that is now the one that is going to push that mark of the beast into your system or wherever it goes. In fact, there's a way religious leaders can really choreograph this information to look like it's true. They even tell you where the jab will go and relate with how that mark of the beast is. So these are very people who have a lot of influence. These are leaders in our society who are expected to have a lot of influence on their followers and their congregants. So that's one group of influential people. We look at a scenario, and for this one I'll have to mention because I think it's public knowledge. Let's take for the case of Tanzania. Tanzania has for a long time believed that there's no COVID or the COVID did not get into Tanzania, and we have seen even this message being championed by their president, and people are moving around without masks. People are moving around having this confidence that, you know what, we are protected, and it's something that comes from the leader of the country. So once misinformation comes from the person who is heading the whole country, this is someone who gets over 70 or over 50% of the votes. So he has a lot of influence and a lot of control. So any information he gives to people or he passes on to people, there's a lot of possibilities that people will believe this, and they will not be able to take action in order to prevent the spread. And the influence, the culture, all these coming celebrities, and a lot of videos. We have cases where even like our governments, where we have experts not being given voices, and we have non-experts have more voice. Like you get into a country where COVID-19 issues are discussed more by politicians than the experts. So there's a very likelihood of misinformation. One time our Minister of Health was under a lot of cameras in Kenya because of something he said about vaccines. So when we have non-experts give expert information, then this becomes a very slippery surface for which misinformation can happen. And you see, these people have influence. So this much influence can really lead to misinformation, and more people will buy this information because it is coming from someone they trust, from their leader, from their religious leader. And of course, if for example, myself here, I'm a Christian, and at some I don't want to go to hell. So if you're not careful, you wouldn't want to get that mark of the beast, which we know is not true. Thank you.
I think that's a perfect segue for the next point I was going to raise, especially when you speak of, you know, the mark of the beast, as well as our politicians denying that there's COVID that's available. One really important point to note is the historical relationship that even the scientific community or the pharmaceutical industry has had with Black communities across the world, even in African countries, and how people have been exploited. And I think, you know, what's become more prevalent right now is some hesitancy towards, you know, understanding vaccinations as well as treatment methods, and then even believing whether or not COVID exists, since, you know, usually some of these diseases, for example, like Ebola, they started in West Africa, and then the fact that this seemed to be a virus that was spreading primarily from Western countries has also given rise to a lot of denialism or skepticism. So I wanted to ask Rutendo to comment on how politicians have also exploited this historical distrust for, you know, spreading disinformation about COVID-19.
Yeah, it's very tricky, and you're right that it's historical as well as I mean contemporary. And Tanzania is a great example of an actual disinformation campaign when it is politicized, that denialism. And I think what we also need to note is that when politicians deny its existence, it's not necessarily always the case of saying it doesn't exist, but it is posed as a questioning. And the reason why it's pretty easy to I guess fall for this misinformation and disinformation is because it makes sense, right? That's one thing we need to know about misinformation and disinformation, is that it needs to make sense within the specific political and economic and social context of the people that are being addressed. So for example, when we consider the fact that we have talked about how historically Black communities and the African communities have not had good relationships with Western health medicine, it makes sense when you tell somebody that, hey, here are historical examples of when we have been, I guess, the lab, right? That was back in the day. That is true. Why would that person not believe it today? And I think a lot of that has to go with also just how the geopolitical narrative and the lack of understanding around the fact that how long does it take to get vaccines, even, and the denialism also comes from the roots and the origin of the virus. So I think politicians kind of were easy, found this route to be very easy because it also served their political purposes. So in a lot of our African countries, we're anti-colonial being anti-imperial, anti-imperial being anti-West. And I'm using we very loosely here, of course. But I don't want you to quote me on that. But then, and so it is such an easy discourse. And so when we consider misinformation and disinformation, we also need to consider the context in which it is functioning in, so that when we then come to ideas of how do we actually fight disinformation, we understand that the techniques and the tactics for African contexts, of course, accepting that Africa is large and diverse, are very different for the tactics for anti-vaxxers in Texas in the US. Sorry, that was random. But you know what I mean? So they come from very different political contexts. And what politicians sort of abuse to make their denial and their disinformation more prominent will be different in both contexts.
Thank you, Rutendo. You actually make a lot of good points, and it actually leads into one of my next questions. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm interested in understanding if there is actually like a trend. It sounds like there is a trend in misinformation, so kind of like same message, same group spreading, but I'm interested in seeing if maybe Sam could give his opinions, and maybe Miriam as well.
Yeah, so I think in the context of political misinformation, it definitely stems from politicians looking to appeal to the masses, especially in the case of countries that had elections come up in the last year. They just wanted to suppress the impact of COVID to tell tell the populace that we are actually doing a good job, even though on ground they weren't really taking the procedures or the measures to curb the spread of COVID. So I know for Ghana, for instance, during December, they normally have a big tourism spur with people going back. And I think the year before last was dubbed the year of return, that really encourage people of African descent to return back to the continent and sort of like connect back with their roots. So after that, there was a big boom for the tourism industry. And I think off of the strengths of that, the government had a narrative. I think at first they did a really good job in terms of blocking outside flights. But when it came to December, when the tourism window was open, the government had a message of, yes, we've curbed COVID to a point where things can open. And I think the president had a speech talking about clubs and public places were closed. But on my Snapchat and Instagram, I saw friends in clubs that were full capacity and people just standing right next to each other, not ensuring COVID protocols or anything. So I think it's really more motivated by sort of like a narrative to gain trust in the populace and also voters to go back to the polls and say, hey, this president said said on TV that he was actually putting policies in place, even though on ground it was a different story. And in terms of it being a trend, I think what the earlier panelists said rang very true in terms of WhatsApp and other social platforms, and also social communities and their behaviors, sort of like spouting and also promoting that one message just cause a celebrity or a public figure shared it, kind of like makes everyone follows. And I think we all, even us here, right, full privy to this, where we kind of like share every story and in times without even fact checking. So in terms of maybe finding solutions and curbing it, maybe us as consumers being cognizant and holding companies like Instagram and Facebook to account, where we say, maybe let us know the actual plans, or let us know the actual actions you're taking to have us have a say or have some power in terms of fact checking on your platforms. And I think Twitter is doing a good job, as in it's not a good job yet, but they're making an effort, right? They launched something called Bird Watchers, where they're allowing experts to fact check tweets that are made around public health and also political statements and things like that.
I guess for me, I would take it from just a little step back and say that when it comes to the trend in like politicians spreading misinformation, there's also a link between the politics itself and then the financial market. So even here in the States, when it comes to like the early information that was presented about COVID, while yes, part of it was politically radicalized, it was more so dealing with the financial aspect and seeing like if the stock market could survive. So when here in the States, when researchers truly and doctors really got information about the COVID being present in the United States, it was well before 2020 even started. It's expected. I mean, it was said that it happened in November, right? So at least the government caught wind of it in November, and then the president at the time had the decision to make to inform the public about COVID being present here in America before Christmas, which is one of the biggest money makers here in America, and shutting down the country starting in December, or waiting until after the holidays pass and all the money is actually generated for businesses, and then telling people, which they ended up doing in March. And we've seen later reports come out saying that had the country had shut down back in November, we could have prevented way more deaths. And the president at the time made the decision to instead send a lot of the PPE that was housed at many of these large research hospitals to Wuhan, China, thinking that, oh, if we nip it in the bud in Wuhan, that it won't come to America. So then we don't even have to worry about it. And then we can spread the information that COVID isn't really a problem here. So if you look at newspaper articles, you'll have newspaper articles talking about COVID-19 back in 2019, but it's in small print on the side, whereas there's going to be a big story and no one's really talking about COVID. So once COVID actually became a problem, at that point, people are like, is it really real or is it not? Because the president has already said, oh, this is not real. This is a joke. It's just the same as the flu. And people already don't even get the flu vaccine. So if you tell me, oh, it's just as deadly as the flu and I've never gotten sick from the flu, why would I then worry about this foreign quote unquote invader coming into my body, right? So then you have that, then you have them radicalizing their bases. When you think about like who, even when it comes to the vaccine itself, who is more susceptible to actually, or who's more willing to take the vaccine, who's not, you can kind of put it down to party lines. When you see what states are here open in America, it's also whose governor is a Republican, whose government is a Democrat, and it continues to go down that way. And so then when it comes to the people truly don't know who to believe, because both bases are just saying things to, in essence, make their supporters happy and make it so that they can get reelected. And that's the problem when it comes to COVID in itself, because COVID isn't a political disease. Like, at the end of the day, people are still dying regardless of what your affiliations is. And now when you have leading health experts saying one thing, the president disputing that, people are going to go with the leader of the free world, because most of the time, us as scientists do not know how to communicate with the everyday person. So if you can't even bring down the scientific knowledge that you have to the point where the typical human being can understand, of course you're going to go to the person who's told it to you very simple and easy that your grandmother can understand with no questions asked. So.
Thank you, Miriam. You brought up excellent points. I think what's really important, I think, in the context of countering disinformation, for starters, is trying to identify if there are any legal means of fighting some disinformation campaigns. So I wanted to ask Gabriel, is there any legal framework available right now in fighting disinformation?
Of course. Thank you so much. So I want to definitely take this as an opportunity to speak to broader government responses across the continent when it comes to countering disinformation. There have been legal tools taken, but so far they've had fairly limited effects. And I kind of want to divide into the three categories of responses to COVID disinformation we've seen. I think the middle category, is there was a lot of quick legislation to basically criminalize disinformation. A lot of it was extensions, which were maybe dubious at times. In South Africa, we saw a few individuals who were arrested for making posts blaming foreigners for spreading COVID-19. I think the end results of those were pretty unclear, limited at best, because A, they couldn't contain the scope of disinformation, and B, they pose more broader questions about the harms on freedom of speech that you're willing to infringe in order to kind of take disinformation under control. To an even further extent, we did see some authoritarian states, especially in Uganda and Zimbabwe, that used disinformation as a pretext for cracking down on free speech and limiting speech. And then on the other side, and this side I'll highlight later, we have states like Senegal, where there's a much more focus on increasing the availability of authoritative content rather than restricting information. So I think the lessons we can take away from this are pretty much threefold. But overall, the lesson is, since disinformation stems from this sort of information vacuum where there's not enough good information flowing around, I think a lot of experts have kind of pointed to the fact that restricting the flow of information is not the best approach. And we should instead go forward thinking how we can imbue freedom of speech and human rights into a lot of the legal frameworks that we take to apply. So first, when it comes to actually regulating content itself, I think a lot of approaches that have been floated by governments in Africa and Europe and South America have been in introducing adversarial processes into how we regulate social media platforms. So making sure that platforms are not the final arbitrators of truth, and that they have some sort of independent organization, mostly staffed by civil society, by academia, who can make sure that platforms take issues of freedom of speech, of human rights, and of course of authoritative content into consideration when they decide what information should be promoted, what information should be taken down. And I think they should kind of err away as much as possible from legislating what disinformation is and when to take it down, because that can lead to a lot of slippery slopes with a lot of potential infringements on human rights. The second response that I also want to kind of add to it is I think strategic communications, while not necessarily a legal tool, has been shown to be pretty effective. I think the case of Senegal was the easiest highlight, where using a lot of very targeted data collection, they were able to quickly work with municipal authorities, imams, civil societies to message when COVID outbreaks were happening and increase public compliance and trust accordingly. And that's a non-legal, non-punitive approach, which is very effective in countering disinformation and increasing trust in public authorities. And I think the third one is, and I think my panelists already mentioned this, but broadly investing in the resilience of societies through digital media literacy, through education, through training. And this can include, for example, legislating and mandating that all schools teach digital media literacy starting at a young age, but also adopting more innovative tools such as gaming and emotional narratives, which can outcompete with disinformation on its own terms, and kind of help people build up that sort of resilience. So my overall answer would be legislative approaches should be more focused on building social resilience, and punitive approaches so far have been extremely limited and showcase a lot of potential harms.
Yeah, I think what you really highlighted has been about how the responses have also been very fractured, and how it has been also very, especially with social media and everything, information easily flowing freely even between continents is really important, and how it's been really challenging to counter any of this disinformation campaign. So part of the issue with combating COVID has been the rise of nationalism, and how everyone decided to have their own national response to the pandemic, even though COVID does not discriminate based on your race or the color of your passport. So I'm interested if, I guess, a couple of the panelists can even comment on this, if it would have been effective to have a regional response, especially using these bands such as SADC, which is the Southern African Development Committee, or ECOWAS, as well as even the Africa Union or CDC Africa, if that would have been useful in being able to have this coordinated response, which would mitigate the spread of COVID-19. And this is a free for all. So anyone can comment on that.
I kind of want to, before someone else responds, I kind of want to point out that even when it comes to disinformation, the fact that when COVID first was introduced to the world, it was said that Black people and African people were immune to the virus in itself, because that was a big part of the problem as well. Because I remember a lot of people were cheering on, like, oh, this is the first time like God is favoring us, like it's reverse racism because we're not dying from this. And then even with some of the early reports, they were talking about like how in Africa, like we've seen really low cases of COVID and such forth. So then people were still operating like, because we are immune to the virus, we don't need to protect ourselves. So even when it comes to like then later on, when it was, the numbers were actually coming out that Black people and African people all throughout the world are actually are disproportionately affected by COVID, and it's more aggressive in these populations. At that point, the damage was already done. You've already told the people they're immune to it. So now you're going to tell them, oh, you need to mask up, you need to wash your hands more frequently, X, Y, and Z, when you've already told them something that was very counterproductive to that. So I think that was one of the biggest things that set us back as a community by and large. And then from that point forward, like even trying to tell people from these communities to go get the vaccine, it's like, it's falling on deaf ears because the information is not consistent.
Gabriel, go ahead.
Sure, yeah, no, I think also a regional response, and I think we've seen a lot more of it recently, but a regional response would have been very effective in information sharing. And I can think of kind of three ways to do this. I think the first and the most important is regionally supporting fact-checking organizations and local journalists, because again, they are at the front lines of countering disinformation, of tracking trends and tracking narratives, which especially can travel across countries on platforms. So I think in December, there was an initiative launched in part with the support of UNESCO to support a bunch of regional African fact-checking organizations at the local level to pool resources. But this was again in December, could have happened much earlier. And I think key there is being able to kind of aggregate information sharing, technology, and best practices to support local level organizations who have the least of these resources. And I think the second one would, of course, be, and something that's also being discussed, is building regional support for local journalism, something which has been degrading across the world for a while, but especially under the COVID pandemic has shrinking resources and needs much greater support. And I think the third one is, as we see countries finally starting to more aggressively take on platforms and really pressure them to enforce content standards, to bring local content moderators on, to develop more into local language capacity, I think any sort of regional approach is really going to be key for regional bodies, for the African Union, to effectively bring platforms to heel and finally get them to confront their lack of accountability and work on disinformation on COVID specifically.
Yeah, I think in terms of fact checking, it seems that it's primarily been used for, around election time. And so now there's been this really important, this urgency for us to develop those similar structures for other aspects. And in this case, in public health campaigns. So Kweku, could you tell us more about, has there been an effort in engaging people with different expertise in order to mobilize people for these fact-checking campaigns? And what are some of the challenges with translating that sort of election or political framework of fact-checking to this public health crisis?
All right, thank you. So last year, which was 2020, Ghana went to the polls. So we had the general election, the presidential and parliamentary elections. And as a fact-checking organization, as we entered into the year 2020, we were preparing, gearing ourselves to be ready to fact-check all the political claims, the rallies, the campaigns, the radio interviews, the TV interviews. So from January, February, we were gearing up, doing all the trainings, bringing people in, setting our systems and tools, picking up strategies. Then boom, COVID-19 hits Ghana in March. And then we realized that politics take a step back and misinformation and disinformation on COVID-19 takes the center stage. Everywhere you turn, on radio, on TV, and given the challenge with the disease, that there was very little information on it, people were just picking their own forms of information, and like a panelist said, through the existing beliefs and traditional systems and thoughts and concerns, the misinformation took the shape in that form, and people were saying dry gin. In a local language, there's one gin we call hypertension, has a very high concentration of alcohol. Hypertension is going to help you cure it. Different concoctions here and there. It meant that we had to step back as a fact-checking organization with our political fact-checking and go full on COVID-19. Now the challenge was that this was very new to us, even though Ebola had showed up some years before in West Africa. It never got to Ghana. It never really traveled far deeper into some of the West African countries. I think it was around Liberia, Guinea, and a few selected countries like that. And so the whole fact-checking engagement on public health and dealing with the health jargons, and you have herd immunity popping up, you have SARS-CoV-2 popping up, and you have all these terminologies coming up. It was extremely difficult. What we did as an organization was that we realized that the most vulnerable populations or group of people were the people staying in the rural communities and in the hinterlands who do not have access to the social media platforms and even rely only on their community radio stations and community engagements for sources of information. So what we did was to bring together a team of different organizations to come and join us. We trained a number of journalists who are scattered across the 16 regions in Ghana on what fact-checking is about and how they should go about it, and therefore paying attention to their context, because the misinformation, like I did say, takes the shape of the community, the concerns, the everyday language, the balance in the society. And so the journalists who were positioned in the midst of the society to fact check their claims. And then we formed a media alliance of about 50 radio stations made up of community radio stations, national radio stations, regional radio stations. And by the way, radio station is the major or is the dominant source of information here in Ghana, and I dare say across many communities in Africa. And so we brought all of them together. As the team of journalists are fact checking the work, we share it with these media alliance groups, And these community members, they spread the information, go to the market centers, try and let it be through the church systems and all those platforms to engage and spread the information with them. Now, the challenge for us was that, for one, even dealing with the jargons in English language was one thing. We had to fall on vaccinologists, immunologists, and public health specialists, epidemiologists, and all those things to help us deal with that. The next step of the challenge was bringing those terms into the local language for people to relate with them. And so you find a lot of interesting coinages here and there just to pass on the message to them, to let them understand what we are talking about. But by and large, as we moved on, we're able to bring them up at par, to let them understand the nature of the disease. And of course, as it went on and people were having challenges and they seeing people also sadly passing on, they realized how serious it is, and therefore the information infiltrated, they understood a lot of the things. And as it moves on, we are trying to improve our information systems and our capacities, improve the capacities to spread the information. The next phase now, as we are beginning to deal with in Ghana, is the vaccinations and the deep-seated mistrust for the jabs and how people feel about them. Of course, it is the next phase for us that we are gearing ourselves with to make sure that we can also scale that challenge.
Yeah, I think hearing you speak has been really fascinating because of the many parallels that there are with what you're talking about in the case in Zimbabwe, where people have been steaming with this, I think this plant is called Zumbani, and people usually make some tea and then they steam to clear their airways. And supposedly, you know, where steaming is good if you have blocked airways, but it's not going to kill the COVID if once it's already in your airways. It could probably help you with some of the, you know, if you're struggling to breathe and you have some of those respiratory challenges, but it's not going to be like a preventative measure from you being affected with COVID. And again, even translating our terms, scientific terms or jargon into local languages, that's not a trivial job. You know, for us, where one word functions to explain a lot of different things. If you have a cold, it's the same word. If you have a flu, it's the same word. There is no like big distinction between some of these effects. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, people were discussing how do we communicate the severity of, you know, this new disease to people in a context that they can understand, not just like with WhatsApp, right? So even in English speaking countries, people were having trouble with understanding. So it's just like the flu. So you have flu-like symptoms. So how is it different from the flu and why would it be more serious? And I guess with the average person, nobody has time to go into, so this is what a coronavirus is, and this is how, you know, the mechanism is different. You know, not every scientist even understands all of that. And so just trying to use our language to describe just the severity of the pandemic. I remember people were joking that maybe we should call this one in Shona Ziwampengo, like snot that's gone crazy, like it's on steroids, so that people could understand that this is actually a really serious phenomenon. One thing that's being brought up, and you know, as Kwarku and Abdul and even Fortunate have been talking about, is, you know, with the platforms that you guys have developed, I'm wondering how much support have you received from governments and what else is the source of, especially some of your funding, because, you know, doing all this fighting, it's a full-time job. You know, it requires a lot of resources even to disseminate all the information. So maybe comment on your sources of support, as well as, you know, some of the challenges that you face in getting or mobilizing these campaigns. And we can start with Abdul.
Yeah, thank you. So for African Science Literacy Network, actually our support comes from the Wellcome Trust. So what happened is we actually got a grant to launch the African Science Literacy Network in 2019. So, and just after we launched in October, and then in 2020, COVID came. So a lot of things that the journalists and the scientists that we have trained in science communication, now most of them now had to focus their projects on the coronavirus pandemic. So it wasn't really about the pandemic, but because we are an organization that is focused on training scientists and journalists in science communication, as well as promoting public understanding of science. So immediately the pandemic came, it was upon us to kind of actually do the job of fact-checking this misinformation and debunking it in the public. So our main source of funding is from Wellcome Trust anyway, but we don't have any support from government. I mean, we all work voluntarily, so that is what we do. But we've been trying to build partnerships with other media organizations, for example, Nigeria Health Watch in Nigeria, which is a popular science and health focused media publication in Nigeria. So we are trying to build more stronger partnerships with them to see how we can collaborate. For example, in terms of crossing, we posts and stories in both the African Science Literacy Network and the Nigeria Health Watch, because Nigeria Health Watch has a very larger audience in Nigeria. So if, for example, we do our stories in local languages, they can be republished on Nigeria Health Watch so that we can have a wider reach. So that is what we are doing at the moment.
Thank you, Abdul. Fortunate, do you want to comment on that?
So our WhatsApp groups are mostly volunteer run. They are under the umbrella of the USIP Community School. So I am a USIP alum. USIP is an organization that was started by Rebecca Ziegler-Mano in Zimbabwe to help students come to the US. So the administrators of the group are mostly USIP alums who came to the US and did their education here and who are now working in the public health field. But we're doing our work in partnerships with students who are currently at the USIP Community School in Zimbabwe. So we just volunteer our time and we post our posts twice a day in the WhatsApp groups every single day. We've also partnered with another student-run organization, which is called the Zim COVID Hub. We were partners with them initially when the pandemic started, and they were working on translating most of the COVID-19 information that was becoming available into some languages that are spoken in Zimbabwe. So they were partnering with, I think it was a language group at Harvard University, and they helped develop these posters that described the virus, that talked about the many preventative measures, and they were producing posters in English, in Shona, in Ndebele mainly, because these are the main languages spoken in Zimbabwe. But then we also took some of the posters and we translated them into some other languages, like Tonga and Venda, which is also spoken in Zimbabwe. But we have no support whatsoever from the government. Like I said, it's volunteer run. And sometimes the challenges that we face are like what everybody has said, to try to translate this high jargon into local languages that are understood by everyone. But one thing that we always try to do when we're distilling information from like a scientific article, we try at least to use very simple English to distill it from all this scientific jargon into at least some English that everybody can understand, because luckily English is our official language in Zimbabwe. And when we cannot translate into the local languages, we go with very simple English. And we always try to cite our sources, which is one thing that we're teaching the high school students in Zimbabwe, to always have a source cited to every post that we post. But one other challenge that we've had is we don't have that much information from the Ministry of Health. So when we get a lot of information or a lot of questions, sorry, from people in the groups where they're right now asking for information about vaccine distribution, we also have to wait until the information becomes available in like local TV stations, local radio stations, and then we go from there.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking about that. I kind of want to segue into a topic. I know that we've been talking a lot about kind of the more positive or more beneficial implications of curbing misinformation and disinformation. But I kind of was thinking about how there's also the possibility of weaponizing this information. And I was kind of interested in hearing from maybe Rutendo, you could start in next, Martin, if I guess in our respective countries, if you've actually seen or heard of or kind of know of the prevalence of weaponizing this information for individual gain.
Oh, that's fascinating. Could you clarify what you mean by individual gain? I just don't want to completely like miss the target on it.
Yeah, it's not necessarily specified. I'm thinking of politicians, I'm thinking of businessmen, I'm thinking of just different people just weaponizing information just for it. So if it's just me, like I have my own purpose for X, Y, and Z thing that I'm working on, you know, in this lab, and maybe I wanted to weaponize information, but I mean, obviously it's not me, but kind of like in your own respective countries, if you kind of seen that play out a little bit.
Sure. I think one thing that has been pointed to that I can actually give an example of, it's weaponized by religious leaders. In my country, I know we had one very prominent evangelical Pentecostal leader talk about it actually was not necessarily him talking about it as the mark of the beast in Christian terms, but he actually put himself forth as somebody that understands the global politics of public health, which is totally straying from like his lane, right? But that idea is that, you know, he posed himself as a leader in the community, as the only person that is able to actually give people the real truth and the real information, and thereby, I mean, the gain for him is that more people go to his church because it's kind of like he's telling you information that's being withheld from you, which is, in my personal opinion, strongly tied to economic financial gain in that respect. I think the other thing that I could say that I have seen is in WhatsApp groups, people that actually now sell things like Zumbani or steaming packs or like COVID safety packs. I think since Fortunate is actually probably in more groups looking at this, might have more physical examples, but in the few ones that I've been in, I've seen people start to sell kind of like COVID-19 packs or whatever it is that they're providing. And so there is that sort of economic financial gain. And especially if you come from a country like Zimbabwe in which, you know, there's no official figure on unemployment rates, but they estimated that it's 90%. Everybody's a hustler. So there's always that opportunity for people to monetize misinformation and disinformation. And then when it comes to political gain, I'd like to say that I think, fortunately, we haven't necessarily seen the government deny it, that to be fair, and also they have actually done very well in terms of countering misinformation in the rural areas by creating booklets and sending social health workers to the rural areas to actually talk to people face to face. So that has been great. However, the political gain and the political benefits that I can see has been, you know, it has provided an opportunity for well-founded criticism from opposition parties to then undermine the government, which then can really slow down responses and sort of actually work against in some ways, right? It's kind of like, yes, they're not working on the healthcare system, but is this how we're going to say it right now when people's lives are at stake? And so that political gain and that political benefit, I have seen it sort of come in the other way. And I guess the challenge is to then balance those perspectives and those views.
Maybe just to add on that, specifically how people are weaponizing COVID-19 or the misinformation for personal gain. I can't be able to pinpoint, but I know right now we have, as we've had, not weaponizing, but still the whole information about COVID-19 has been used for so much personal gain. And I'll still go back to a very realistic example that has just happened in my country, Kenya. And in Kenya, we've had a very big scandal called the COVID billionaires. So COVID billionaires are people who made a lot of billions from COVID contracts, supplying PPEs. And we see that most of the names that are being mentioned are like the big people in government or the people who are holding different positions in parliament. Of course, these are cases that are under investigation, and as we know, and we have had previous history from this type of investigation. Most of the time, they will not be concluded to as directed by that is the president gave around 21 days to have such these cases investigated. So we've seen a lot of beneficial benefits happening to companies and to individuals who are getting these millions. So it's been both in the opposition parties and in government, and we've also seen the way COVID has been used to really deny people rights, and as we've also seen in the case of Uganda, where we've had like the toughest campaign period, and we've had a lot of human rights issues, and all this is the reason for all this is COVID. We are trying to stop the spread and so on. So in terms of personal gain, it's both the correct information and the misinformation that has been used for those benefits.
Hi. So a very quick point on this. In Ghana, it took a different turn for us, because at one point we were going to the elections and the political systems were sharpened to counter each other for political gains. And then COVID-19 came in. So they weaponized COVID-19 as now the new tool to help them win their elections. And so you have the leader of the opposition in parliament on health communication coming out to make a claim, for instance, that the World Health Organization has come in to assess Ghana and they are ranking us very zero, running us down, that we are not prepared to fight COVID-19. Then we step in to counter it and say that is not true. World Health Organization came to access us, and this is the situation. So you find that we found a lot of politicians using COVID-19 as a campaign element to run down the government, or to expose the government on why they have not built a lot more health infrastructure, and comparing the previous government to say he built so many hospitals. Look at you, if he hadn't built it, our system would have been down. Now, because of the COVID stress on health facilities, we are depending on the opposition leaders' health contribution to the system, to our health system to survive. Secondly, there were a lot of alternative treatments moving around. So there's this drink we call Sobolo. It's a reddish drink created from a hibiscus plant. A colleague of mine did a report to fact check it to say it is not a cure, or it is not one that can be used to treat COVID-19. Then a company that produces some of these products came with its people to attack us on social media, saying, why are we doing a report like this? Because they were gaining from the rounds that that drink is able to help cure. So a lot of them, core effects, a lot of herbal medicines that were being thrown around as alternative cures, they were gaining from it. And our work in fact checking them was trouble for them. They kept attacking us every now and then. Just wanted to make that input.
All right, thank you. So we're coming up on time, and I wanted to give every panelist an opportunity to make any last closing remarks, especially in terms of what effective strategies you think we should use, even engaging our governments, in order for us to not only combat COVID-19, but also this secondary pandemic of mis and disinformation. So we can start off with Gabriel.
Thank you. I just would say that it's important to keep putting pressure on platforms to really be accountable to engaging in effective content moderation, hiring locally, making sure they have local language capacity, and they use all the funds they said they would to support digital media literacy, to support all the incredible civil society initiatives and local journalistic initiatives working to combat disinformation around COVID.
Thank you. Rutendo.
I think that, like, just for closing remarks, I think that it is important that we also consider, like, just having more information and more representation of the people that are giving the information. I mean, for just a quick example is that there is a doctor of Zimbabwean origin who works for Pfizer and was involved in the making of the vaccine, and his picture started going viral when he talked about his past as a Zimbabwean and things like that. It would be nice to see him from the beginning, actually, because then some of these questions would not have come up, seeing that representation. A lot of African scientists have been involved in different aspects with different companies and different firms in the creation of this vaccine, in understanding the virus as well. So I think when we give information, it is important to target the contexts that we're dealing with, so that we can also speak to the political, socio-economic realities.
Thank you, and Fortunate.
I think my last remarks would be, one thing that we've learned from running our platform is the need to translate scientific language into more local languages, more understood languages. There are so many common English words that we use for these many infectious diseases that we could just start translating them, not to be a doomsday prep or anything, in case there's another pandemic or in case we need this information as readily. I think maybe it's time to just start coming up with a dictionary of some sorts, and maybe having regional partnerships, because there are many common languages that are spoken among regions. That would be very helpful. And also, one last thing, to maybe start pursuing research into some of these local remedies that people have been postulating, because some of them have been used for so many times, for such a long time, that if we actually look at their scientific benefits, people might actually gain a lot more, and they might trust what is locally grown, in the event that we're getting a vaccine from China that people don't really trust, because everything that comes from China is usually associated with not being very properly made. If we local things that people actually understand, that people actually know. But I am all for the science first before we.
Yeah. Kweku.
Well, my closing remarks is to focus on the next phase of our fight, which is the vaccination, the jab, and the misconception and the deep mistrust that has come up in its wake. I know my country, for instance, there's been an announcement that something like the government is procuring some of these vaccines for us, and even though they are making the efforts, if the mistrust and the misinformation is allowed to thrive, it's really going to derail the whole effort the government is making. And so yeah, we call on government to move beyond the challenges that faces us. Of course, we are all challenged. It's very novel for all of us, and we hope that partnership can work. We hope that funding support would come, that we'll be able to contribute to combat this and clear ourselves from this pandemic.
Abdul, thank you, not Agu.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the first thing I think we need to do is, like, we have genomic surveillance that helps us to track, SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus variants that are emerging. So maybe we can have something like a rumor surveillance, an instituted rumor surveillance in countries that will help us to actually survey and understand the trends of, and even the different kinds of this misinformation that are spreading. I feel like that will help us to be able to kind of have more strategic communication that targets specific populations and people. Like I said, in Nigeria, we've had these issues of misinformation, even with the vaccines, with the polio vaccines in northern Nigeria, and even in eastern Nigeria, we've had that, in the past, where there were rumors that the Nigerian army was actually vaccinating children who are from the eastern part of the country, so they don't grow and become and fight the civil war again. So you have all these rumors spreading. At the moment, I know that the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency in Nigeria is actually has rolled out like a survey to help them like have that is in the horizon to the rollout of the vaccines, to help them like have just a pulse of the entire country, the rumors that are spreading, particularly about the vaccine. And with that, they are hoping to develop strategic tailored communications that will help in terms of dispelling this misinformation and also prevent vaccine hesitancy at the moment. Yeah, so, and finally, I saw a question like in the chat box. Someone asked about whether Africa is developing its own vaccine. Yeah, I think like that's really a very interesting question. Do we always have to wait, and beg for donors, for foreign donors, for international, for international countries to always, give us vaccines? Well, it is really a big, for me, I think it is a big lesson for us Africans and for our leaders. When we've seen that the people that used to help us are actually in bigger trouble than us. So they even need this vaccine more than us. And we've seen the politics around it that is still playing. So far, I know that in Nigeria.
Wait, sorry, Abdul, I don't mean to cut you off, but we're running out of time. So I think everyone else, you have about 15 seconds, so we can start with Martin. You're on mute.
Sorry for that. My conclusion is, or final words, let's convert these community leaders or these religious leaders who are trying to maybe spread, do the misinformation because of their influence, engage them and use them to spread the right information, because these are people that our community depend on and our community trusts. So it's to the better advantage of the community if they are part of the movement that is speaking the truth and the right information.
Thank you, Martin. Miriam?
I would say to continue to be truth tellers in all capacities. I know we've been talking about large scale the leaders of the community. I was going to give a story, but that will be short. But I've also noticed, at least here in the States, that it's also the one-on-one interactions that are where misinformation is being spread a lot. It happened here in the Somali community that led to a protest happening in downtown Columbus because they thought that healthcare workers were being prejudiced towards them, whereas healthcare workers were actually more so trying to control contact of people coming to the hospital and visiting patients and not spreading the disease out into the community. So while we look at it on the larger scale, we do need to look at it on the micro scale and looking at the interactions that people are having with their neighbors and when they're telling their stories, how that influences the next person from actually seeking help or actually taking the vaccine when they get access to it.
Yeah, those are good points. John?
All right, thank you. One thing is clear from all the explanations that have gone so far, that one size fits all approach would not solve each context specific issues with respect to this COVID-19 infodemic. For me, what it's quite important is the timing of accurate information in the public space in order to fill the already existing knowledge gap. If we don't do that, then that gap would then be filled by these chunks of disinformation and misinformation. And I think that for us within the academia, universities have serious role to play in doing this. So just like, Michigan is doing, all public universities or private universities in Africa may have that social and corporate responsibility of engaging departments, units that are more health aligned and helping them, students, staff, getting into the communities to share accurate information about this, especially when we are waiting for the imminent arrival of this vaccine in order to avoid this vaccine hesitancy. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you everyone for the panel. I really enjoyed having this discussion. I think the highlights to take away from this is that it's a community effort. Everyone has a role to play in combating the disinformation. And we do need to have some coordinated responses at the governmental level and, academic, corporate, and government partnerships so that we can have, this effective fight against disinformation, because I think whatever next pandemic comes through, we're going to have to fight the same problem, and we have to be prepared for that. So thank you everyone for showing up. You can catch more of this on our podcast with Rutendo Cole's Taking Into Account, and it's on every platform. If you did want to know more about vaccines, I know there was a panel yesterday, and I think everything from this conference has been recorded, so you can also catch up on that on the African response. I'm so sorry that we ran over time, so I will give it to you guys to give the closing remarks, but thank you for attending.